venti vanilla latte, please. Thank you. Guard your girl boxing. Coffee with Coltrane. We here. All right, let's get right into it. Juan Carlos Gomez took on Vitaly Klitschko for the WBC Heavyweight Championship of the world. Fight came on. I apologize. I forgot I'm on the East Coast. I said 5. The fight actually came on 6. Got a couple emails about that. I do apologize about that. But needless to say, the fight took place Saturday, and Vitaly was successful in keeping his WBC strap. Pretty much put on a dominating boxing masterpiece as I expected. Juan Carlos Gomez, he was game for one round of action. I mean, I know some of you out there, shout out to Money May, probably gave him a little bit more credit than he probably deserved. I like to call a guy like Juan Carlos Gomez fight game a treadmill fight game. And what I mean by that is he's doing a lot of running but ain't going nowhere. And, he came out the first round establishing the cat paw jab a la Lennox Lewis. He was moving his head a little bit, but that's it. And when you're fighting a guy like Vitaly or Vladimir Klitschko, you better have a plan and you better be able to stick to it. I knew from watching the second round that Carlos was going to tire out in his fight, which he did. That's why you see the clumsiness of fighters falling on the ground, because a lot of that attributes to being tired. And like I said, he was doing the cat paw, he was moving around, but really wasn't doing nothing. He wasn't putting his hands on Klitschko, which is most importantly. Like as you see in the background, he got a nice hold. He got a nice setup, but the plan wasn't executed. And I still believe this. I think Klitschko is fighting with one leg. But these guys that he's fighting are so limited that he's able to do it. I watched one of his legs closely to see if he was able to make those cuts. And I just see him just being limited with that leg that he tore, had the cartilage damage in. But needless to say, he's so sharp in his attack that he could beat these guys with one leg and one hand if necessary, a la the Samuel Peter fight. But Klitschko did what he do, is what they always do. And you put him in a ring with a tomato can, and they're going to treat him like one. Like I said, I gave Juan Carlos Gomez one round in that fight, and that was the first round. And he looked, like I said earlier, he looked okay, but he didn't have a plan. He didn't stick to it, And I know there's some rumors out there, oh, man, Klitschko looked slow, and he looked methodical and all that. Look, until somebody actually proved that to me in the ring, then all that is here's he say, she say, So it looked like Klitschko, speaking of Klitschko, like Klitschko and Hayes look like that's back on again. So we'll keep our fingers crossed and hope that jump off. Juan Carlos Gomez, he seems like a guy that could maybe beat some of the lesser talent out there. But when you step it up this level, you see what type of fighter Juan Carlos Gomez is. And there's a lot of Juan Carlos Gomez's in the heavyweight division. So props to Vitaly Klitschko for keeping his strap. And basically just putting on a boxing masterpiece. Well, I wouldn't call it a masterpiece. Just putting on a boxing lesson and wore out Gomez. I do think that fight should have been stopped a lot earlier. Because he took a lot of beatings in that. He took a major beating in that fight. So, we'll see what happens with that. All right, Roy Jones, he won, like I said. Oh, did I say it? I can't remember. But shout out to all the suckers out there that bought the fight. No, I'm just playing. I know y'all boxing degenerates, and you crave for boxing, so you'll buy a faded shell of himself, Roy Jones fight, beating up another shell of himself, ex-French contender Omar Sheika. From what I've heard and what I've read and what I gather, typical, as I mentioned in the other video, Roy Jones beating up on those type of fighters. As soon as you put Roy in a ring with a Chad Dawson or Bernard Hopkins, he's going to look old and he's going to look like what we saw against Kawasaki. So I hope Roy hangs it up, and this is it, but it won't be. From what I've been reading, what I've been gathering, like he still is on that mission to become the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. How that's going to happen, I have no idea. But moving right along to this Friday's card, you got Samuel Peter versus on our hometown guy here, Eddie Chambers. This is a good fight. I'm very interested in this fight. And let me just preface my statement and say this before I get into the fight, because I know a lot of y'all are going to say, oh, you're only picking Eddie to win the fight because he's from y'all hometown. Well, yes, Eddie's from our hometown. Yes, Eddie's a friend to the show. But I always felt as though we was always objective in viewing Eddie before his fights and after his fights. Analyzing his fight game before and after his fight. So, let's get that premise right from the get. All right, this is an interesting fight. I think this is a get-back fight for both fighters, for Peters and Chambers. I think the last time we saw Samuel Peters, he was getting trashed by Vitaly Klitschko in a massacre of a fight. And the last time we saw Eddie, he lost a unfortunate lopsided decision to Alexander Povetkin. A fight that Eddie was actually in early on in the fight, and then Povetkin just put his foot on the gas and overwhelmed Eddie in the later rounds of the fight. Fight's an interesting one. You can see it going possibly two ways. I can see Samuel Peter coming in, and trying to outwork and overwhelm Eddie Chambers like Alexander Povetkin did. I can see Eddie still in the earlier rounds, boxing, using every inch of the ring and using his, his slickness and using his speed to have Samuel Peters on his toes. I don't know. It's really a hard fight to call. I think if we look at the fight on paper, I think Eddie is slick enough to beat Samuel Peter, but you do have to wonder, about the Alexander Povetkin fight when Povetkin kind of, imposed his will on Eddie, in the later stages of that fight. So, how the fight's going to play out, I see Eddie boxing, using his slickness, using his speed to a 12-round decision. I think Peter is kind of shot a little bit, if you will. Eddie's not that too far off in age, but I think Peter's been in a lot more wars. I think that Klitschko fight, he lost a lot of his career in that fight. I think he was beat very bad. And I don't want to use one fight to gauge another fight, but the way he was beat in that fight and how lackluster he looked in that fight, it's going to be interesting to see. Now, granted, he's not going in there with a puncher, but he is going in there with a guy that's fast, that's younger, and that has some slickness to his fight game. So that being said, I got Eddie winning by a 12-round decision. And I think Peter is going to be one of these fighters that's a gauge for young and up-and-coming fighters. So we'll see how that play out. All right. Also, you got Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., pardon me, and he's fighting, I don't remember the dude's name, Luciano Suelo. Thank you. 23-0. It's a pay-per-view card. Also, Humberto Soto's on that card. He's fighting Antonio Davis. That's just a fight, for those who bought the Roy Jones Jr. fight, you guys will probably buy this fight too. So for you degenerates out there, mark your date for that. That's actually that Saturday. The Eddie Chambers and Samuel Peter fight is on ESPN Friday night, the Friday prior to the Julio Cesar Chavez fight, which is March 27th, and the Chavez fight is on March 28th. All right, let's get into it. Marvin Hagler versus Bernard Hopkins, the mythical match that we all been craving for. I'm not gonna get into prior resumes and all that because I obviously Hagler had the better resume, and Bernard, he fought every he fought. There's nothing we can do about that. The fight's gonna take place at 160 first of all. Both of their natural weights. As far as speed, speaking of Eddie, just showed up in the background. As far as speed and power, I go with Hagler. Far as athleticism, I go with Hagler. Far as intelligence, far as being the better overall boxer, and far as being able to be tricky, I go with Hopkins. It's an interesting fight. The style. I always say that beat Bernard Hopkins is the athleticism, speedy style. Why I just gave both of those attributes to Hagler, he's not your typical athletic fighter like a Roy Jones or like a Chad Dawson, or like a Sugar Ray Leonard. Like I think Sugar Ray Leonard would give nightmares to Bernard Hopkins in a 12. Oh, by the way, this is a 12-round fight, not a 15-rounder. In a 12-round fight, because of the athleticism and the speed that normally gives Hopkins, the trouble. Hagler, he likes to come straight forward, which is not always a good thing for a Bernard Hopkins opponent coming straight forward, because Bernard, that's when he sets up his counter right cross when you come straight to him. To beat Bernard Hopkins, I think you got to fight from a distance. You got to use a jab. You got to use a lot of movement for Bernard Hopkins. Make him work a la Joe Kawasaki. I think Hagler is a lot stronger than Bernard, so if the fight was to happen inside, I think I would give the edge to Hagler if he was to tie Bernard up. But I think Bernard is too tricky and too savvy to allow for something like that to happen. I think he would set a lot of traps for Hagler. You know, Hagler being a vet that he is, I don't know if he would be able to bait into them traps. But, you know, Hagler do like to mix it up a lot. But I don't know, man. We're going to continue this talk going on. That's just part one of, you know, Hagler versus Hopkins. This is Coffee with Coltrane, GYGB. We here.